Welcome to TOCHI Stories. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on post notification because it will mean the whole world to me. Now let's get right into the story. Brace yourself. The rain poured mercilessly as Mama Evelyn stood outside her son's grand duplex, her old wrapper soaked and clinging to her frail body. In her left hand was a small wooden box, no larger than a stool, held tight against her chest like a child shielding her last possession from thieves. The gate was already being closed behind her by the security guard Tina had hired, and the only thing that echoed louder than the rain on the zinc roof was Tina's voice from the balcony. "Don't come back here again with your bush witchcraft," she screamed, laughing. Evelyn turned her face upward briefly, her eyes scanning the window where her son Desmond stood, silent, arms folded, refusing to meet her gaze. That silence hurt more than the rain, more than the insults, more than the cold. She had birthed that boy with her own blood, had nursed him when he nearly died at 5, had sold every piece of jewelry she ever owned just to send him to university. And now, without a word, he let a woman, a stranger, chase her into the streets like a dog. The street lights flickered in the distance as Evelyn trudged forward, her slippers sliding in the mud. Each step sank deeper, slower, as if the earth itself felt her sorrow. She didn't cry, not because she wasn't hurting, but because her heart had no more tears to offer. Her body was too familiar with humiliation. Years of sacrifice had taught her to hide pain behind silence. Passers-by watched from nearby kiosks, some whispering, some shaking their heads in pity, others too embarrassed to say anything. She remembered when Desmond had begged her to come live with him after his business started doing well. He promised her rest. He said, "Mama, you've suffered too much for me. Come enjoy small peace." But peace had become prison, and rest had become rejection. What they didn't know, what even Desmond didn't know, was that the box she carried contained more than old clothes or photos. It held something that would change everything. But for now, all anyone saw was a humiliated old woman walking alone in the rain. As she disappeared down the street, Tina closed the curtains and chuckled. "Good riddance," she said. Desmond remained quiet. Something deep in him stirred, but he shoved it away, telling himself his mother was being dramatic, and that it was time she moved on anyway. But deep down, even he wasn't sure if he had done the right thing. Mama Evelyn's figure faded under the streetlights, the wooden box balanced like a burden and a shield all at once. Her back remained straight, her shoulders firm. She didn't look back again. The rain soaked her entirely, but she never flinched. She had been through storms before. This too would pass. But this time she wouldn't be returning. Not to that house. Not to that son. Not again. Mama Evelyn reached the rusted iron door of a small compound at the edge of the slum, a place most people had forgotten existed. It used to be a chicken pen years ago, back when she and her late husband ran a small poultry before hardship killed the dream. Now, abandoned and dusty, it would be her shelter. With trembling hands, she opened the creaky wooden box and began wiping the inside of the room. There was no mattress, no light, just cracked walls and a broken bench. But none of that mattered. She sat on the floor and opened the box, the one Tina had mocked and Desmond had ignored. Inside were small plastic bags, tightly tied. She unwrapped one, revealing neatly stacked bundles of cash, all crisp, all untouched, all carefully hidden for years. Beneath it was a document folder, her name boldly printed on each certificate. Evelyn Samuel. They had no idea she was sitting on $1 million. Her hands shook slightly as she lifted the old photo of her husband and placed it beside the money. She whispered, "Samuel, I've done all I can. But I'm tired. So tired." For years, she had silently poured money into Desmond's business through a trusted former neighbor who operated a shell investment company. She never wanted the glory or the credit. She only wanted her son to succeed. But now, after everything, after the insults, the mockery, the day Tina told Desmond, "Tell that woman to go and die for all I care," she had decided it was time to stop. That final insult had been the breaking point. Not just because it hurt, but because Desmond agreed. He told her to leave, and she left, with everything, with her tears, with her love. and with the treasure they never knew she had been protecting all along. She looked around the tiny room, then pulled out a small pot and boiled water on a portable stove she had brought. No servants, no house help, no luxury. Just peace. Her heart was still broken, but at least now it beat freely. Her plan had never been to use the money for herself. She wanted to hand it over to Desmond one day, to surprise him when he was truly ready. But now she wasn't so sure. Maybe it was time to use it for herself. Maybe it was time to live, not to impress, not to rescue, just to live. As the wind howled through the cracks in the wall, Evelyn lay down on the floor, wrapping a wrapper around herself. The money sat beside her, a silent witness to years of thankless love. They had laughed at the box. But inside it was not just money, it was her legacy, her loyalty, and now her freedom. Years earlier, in a small village hospital lit only by lanterns and the occasional flicker of candlelight, Samuel, Mama Evelyn's husband, lay gasping for air. His chest heaved with effort, his eyes sunken, yet filled with urgency. Evelyn held his hand, her eyes swollen from tears, her heart refusing to accept the truth. He pulled her closer and whispered with the last strength he could gather, "Evelyn, our son, promise me. You'll take care of him, even if you have to crawl." She nodded, sobbing. Then he added, "There's a land, the one in Enugu. I sold it last year. The buyer gave me cash, all of it. I put it in a box, inside the old cabinet at the back. Use it for Desmond. Use it only when he truly needs it. And don't trust people. Even family can fail." Minutes later, he was gone, his hand falling limp in hers. The doctor covered his body. Evelyn stood there, frozen. That night, everything changed. Evelyn didn't go to sleep that night. Instead, she walked to their compound, went into the back cabinet, and found the box, the very one she still carries today. Inside, wrapped in brown paper and tied with old shoelaces, was cash, much more than she had imagined. Alongside it were the documents of sale, and a letter Samuel had scribbled for her. "This is my last gift to you and our son," it read. "Let it guide him to greatness. And please, keep your heart soft, even when the world turns hard." That letter became her compass. She never touched the money, not even during the worst seasons of hunger, until Desmond needed her help in the city. Even then, she never used her name. She created Yes Holdings, a nod to Evelyn Samuel, and watched her son rise. Each time he succeeded, her heart soared. She told no one, not even her closest friends at the market. Her sacrifice was her secret joy. Now, lying alone in the darkness of her small room, she recalled those words again. Keep your heart soft. She had tried. God knows she had tried. But what does one do when the same child they crawled for spits in their face? When the same roof she helped raise becomes the roof that rejects her? As she clutched the faded letter again in the dim lantern light, Evelyn felt a tear slide down her cheek. Not from pain, but from the ache of letting go. She wasn't just losing a home. She was losing a son. And somehow, she knew he would come back. But would she still be there when he did? After Samuel's burial, the village expected Mama Evelyn to collapse under grief and poverty, but she refused to be buried alongside her husband in spirit. She rose each morning before the cock crowed, tied her faded wrapper tightly across her waist, and walked several kilometers to the village market with a basket of firewood on her head. It was never enough. Some days she barely sold anything, but she would sit there patiently, sometimes under the sun, sometimes under the rain, watching others walk past her with pity. She didn't want pity. She wanted to survive. She wanted to keep her son in school. When Desmond was sent home for unpaid fees, she would cry quietly in the night, and then return to the market with borrowed goods the next day, selling even at a loss. The weight of her responsibilities grew heavier, yet her shoulders never bent. She stopped buying meat, stopped buying fabric, and walked barefoot for months to save transport fare. Every single coin was carefully hidden in the corner of an empty Milo tin under her bed, until she had enough to send Desmond back to class. The land inheritance her husband left remained untouched. Every time she considered using it, she would stare at the note he left and whisper, "Not yet." Desmond's needs were great, but Evelyn's faith in God and in her own strength was greater. She once stood under the sun for 3 straight days just to convince a trader to loan her a basket of yams to sell. She promised to pay back with interest and never broke that promise. Her name in the market became synonymous with honesty and humility. Mothers would point her out to their children and say, "That's the woman who labors with dignity." Yet, while everyone else admired her, she was simply holding on to hope, to her son's future, to the promise she made at her husband's grave. On nights when she couldn't afford Gary, she would boil water and drink it like soup, telling herself that better days were coming. Her neighbors offered scraps, but she always smiled and said, "God will provide." Then came the turning point. One afternoon, Desmond returned from school with a letter. He had been admitted to a federal university. The joy that exploded in Evelyn's heart that day could have lifted a mountain. But when she saw the cost of the admission, registration, and hostel fees, her heart sank. That night, she sat in front of her husband's photo, hands trembling, and opened the wooden box for the first time in 5 years. The money was still intact, but she didn't touch it. Instead, she walked the next morning to a distant cousin and begged to borrow money against her old jewelry. The cousin agreed, but not without mocking her. "Why suffer so much for a boy? Let him drop out and learn trade," they said. Evelyn smiled and walked away. She didn't argue. That day, she walked home with a torn nylon bag filled with hope. She knew, no matter what it took, Desmond would go to university, even if she had to die trying. The day Evelyn saw Desmond off at the motor park, she packed a small bowl of rice, 2 boiled eggs, and a Bible into his traveling bag. "Don't forget God," she said, holding his hands tightly. "Don't forget where you came from. And don't forget me." Desmond had grown into a fine young man, tall, intelligent, and full of ambition. The villagers watched with pride as Evelyn hugged him, tears in her eyes, her entire life wrapped around that one boy. She stood there until the bus disappeared into the horizon, her hand raised in silent prayer. From that moment on, she lived only through phone calls and letters. Desmond called often at first, sending text messages like, "I love you, Mama," and "I miss your food." Each time he said, "Mama, I'll make you proud," Evelyn's heart swelled. She told everyone at the market, "My son is in the city." She began to walk with more dignity, knowing that her life's sacrifices were not in vain. But life in the city changed Desmond. Slowly, his calls became less frequent. He stopped asking about how she was and started boasting about how things were moving. Evelyn didn't complain. She assumed he was busy. When he got a job after NYSC, she rejoiced. She even cooked a full pot of egusi and sent it with a neighbor traveling to Lagos. But Desmond never called to say he received it. When she finally reached him, he casually said, "Ah, I gave it to the security man. I don't really eat those kinds of soups anymore." That statement hit her like a blow. She laughed it off on the phone, but when she hung up, her tears soaked her wrapper. Still, she didn't complain. She reminded herself that growth sometimes changes people, and she chose to continue praying for him. She didn't want to believe that city life was changing the boy she raised. When Desmond invited her to Lagos to stay with him for a while, she was hesitant but hopeful. She packed her best wrapper, her only nice slippers, and the wooden box, and boarded the bus with joy. On arrival, she was amazed by the tall buildings, the bright lights, and the noise of the city. Desmond welcomed her warmly at the park, though he seemed distracted. As they reached his small but neat apartment, she noticed that everything had changed, the furniture, his accent, even his posture. But again, she said nothing. That night, she prayed over his house, anointing each door with oil, asking God to preserve her son. What she didn't know was that in the days to come, another woman would step in, one who would undo all she had spent a lifetime building. And her name was Tina. Tina was beautiful in the way that made people pause, light-skinned, curvy, and always dressed in clothes that screamed luxury. The first time Mama Evelyn met her, the girl was sitting on the living room couch, legs crossed, scrolling through her phone. She didn't rise, didn't greet, didn't even look up. Evelyn greeted her first. "Good evening, my daughter." Tina muttered, "Hi." That was it. Desmond brushed it off, claiming Tina was just moody sometimes. But from that day, Evelyn's instincts told her something was wrong. Tina moved around the house like she owned it, and in many ways she did. Within months, she had moved in fully, claiming she was saving rent. Desmond had given her keys, space, and worst of all, power. She began redecorating, throwing away Evelyn's old curtains, replacing the pots with imported ones, and calling her friends to laugh about the village vibe of the house before she came. Mama Evelyn tried to bond with her. She offered to cook to help her learn some traditional dishes, but Tina only rolled her eyes and said, "I don't eat all those pepper-filled native things." Desmond said nothing. In fact, he began agreeing with Tina more, defending her even when she insulted Evelyn to her face. "Your wrapper is always smelling of smoke," Tina once said. "Do you sleep inside firewood?" The insult stung like a blade. Still, Evelyn forced a smile. She reminded Desmond privately, "This girl, she's not humble. She doesn't respect elders. Be careful." But he snapped. "Mama, can't you just let me be happy?" That was the first time he raised his voice at her. The boy she carried on her back for years now scolded her, because of a woman who never knew what a single day of hunger felt like. From then on, things got worse. Tina began locking the kitchen and hiding ingredients. She bought her own expensive food and labeled it with stickers that read, "Do not touch." Evelyn was relegated to the guest room, which Tina would often forget to clean. Once, Evelyn found her wrapper in the trash. Tina claimed it was accidental. But Evelyn knew. It wasn't the house that was rejecting her. It was her own son's heart, which had been stolen and replaced with pride. She wrote in her journal that night, "When a woman fights you for the son you carried, it is not just jealousy, it is heartbreak." She tried to stay out of their way, quietly helping where she could. She even offered to support Desmond's growing business, never revealing that the funds were from her hidden inheritance. But the more she gave, the more invisible she became. And deep down, she knew a storm was coming. Mama Evelyn had lived long enough to know when a woman's smile carried venom. Tina's face might have worn expensive makeup and lashes that fluttered like butterfly wings, but her tongue was as sharp as a blade, and her presence like poison in a pot of soup. Desmond, however, seemed entranced, not just by her beauty, but by the illusion of success and status she represented. "She's smart," he often said. "She's helping me rebrand." Rebrand? Evelyn blinked. So the same upbringing that raised him wasn't worthy of being displayed anymore? She kept her mouth shut, but began praying more fervently, hoping God would open Desmond's eyes. But as the days turned into weeks, his eyes remained closed, not from blindness, but from willing ignorance. He didn't want to see who Tina truly was. And each time Mama Evelyn tried to speak to him in private, he dismissed her. "You just don't like her because she's not from the village," he snapped once, not realizing how deeply those words cut. The disrespect became routine. Tina spoke to her like a maid, sometimes asking her to sweep the floor or fetch her phone from a bedroom. Mama Evelyn obeyed, not because she was weak, but because she didn't want to bring shame to herself or create tension in Desmond's home. One Sunday, while preparing breakfast, she overheard Tina on the phone with a friend, saying, "This house was such a mess before I came. His mum was literally sleeping in the living room like a squatter. Thank God I introduced him to class." Evelyn paused, her hands trembling as she sliced onions. That was her house, her home, her dream, her effort, her son. And now she was being described like an unwanted squatter. She said nothing, but that night she wrote again in her journal, "A child who forgets the taste of his mother's soup will one day eat sorrow with a golden spoon." Still, Evelyn remained, not because she was helpless, but because she believed that love, patience, and prayer could turn things around. She would sneak small amounts of her own money into Desmond's accounts through anonymous transfers, supporting his dreams silently. When he bought his first delivery van, it was her investment that made the down payment possible, through a business account name he didn't recognize. He celebrated with Tina, claiming it was all his effort, and Evelyn smiled from the corner, clapping quietly. Even in disrespect, she loved. Even in mockery, she gave. But it wasn't blindness, it was faith. A desperate hope that her son would one day wake up and remember who truly stood behind him. But as the days rolled on, her hope began to wither under the weight of silence, shame, and the one thing she never thought she'd feel toward her own child: fear. Desmond's logistics business started as a small operation with one van, 2 staff members, and a fragile dream. When it faltered early due to overhead costs, Evelyn saw the panic in her son's eyes. He paced the living room late into the night, calculating figures, mumbling to himself about loans and debt. Tina offered no comfort. "You need to stop thinking small," she snapped. "We need investors, real ones." That was the night Evelyn made a decision. She contacted a trusted friend from her market days who had relocated to Abuja and now ran a low-profile consulting firm. She told him to create an anonymous investment channel, a silent partner under the name ES Holdings. Evelyn Samuel. She transferred the first 10 million Nigerian nairas in installments, drawn from the $1 million inheritance Samuel had left her. It was the first time she touched that money, and it wasn't for herself, it was for Desmond. Even though he didn't know it, the money saved his business. New staff were hired. A second van was purchased. Contracts began to flow in. Desmond attributed the success to Tina's marketing advice and his own hard work. Evelyn said nothing. She watched from the shadows as he praised everyone but her. On the day he moved to a bigger office and held a small party, he raised a glass to "my partner in everything" and kissed Tina on the cheek while guests clapped. Evelyn stood in the background, dressed in her old Ankara, smiling through a heart that bled. No one knew she was the true reason that glass could even be filled. Later that evening, while washing the dishes alone in the kitchen, Tina walked in and scoffed. "You like washing things, don't you?" she said coldly. Evelyn didn't reply. She just wiped a plate, humming a soft hymn under her breath. Her dignity could not be stolen by words. As months passed, Evelyn continued to fund the business through ES Holdings, but she began to question herself. Was this still love? Or had it become self-inflicted punishment? Tina grew bolder, calling Evelyn the house ghost and mocking her to guests. Desmond grew colder, more absent, more drawn into Tina's world of social climbing. He started talking about taking loans to expand internationally. Loans he didn't need if only he knew the full extent of the investment she had left unused. But Evelyn stayed quiet, because silence was her shield. She believed that some truths must wait for the right moment. But what she didn't realize was that the silence she thought was noble was being mistaken for weakness, and that silence, one day, would be shattered beyond repair. The home Mama Evelyn once prayed over had become a battlefield. Not one of guns or fists, but of glances, whispers, slammed doors, and calculated insults. Tina's control extended to every corner. She changed the locks on the kitchen cabinets and kept the key in her handbag. She would host friends in the parlor, giggling and showing them Evelyn's old wrapper as a joke from the village. They would all laugh, sipping wine, while Evelyn stayed locked in her room, clutching her rosary. Once, she tried to warm some soup in the microwave. Tina came in, snatched the bowl, and poured it down the sink, saying, "This house doesn't do bush food." Desmond walked in just then, saw everything, and said nothing. He didn't even look at his mother. That night, Evelyn prayed with her Bible open, unable to eat, her stomach turning from hunger and grief. She stopped using the main bathroom when Tina began locking it with a password smart lock. She fetched water from the compound tap like a tenant and slept on a mattress that sagged in the middle. Tina never lifted a finger to cook or clean, yet made Evelyn feel like a burden. The staff in the house were scared to speak up. Everyone tiptoed around Tina. Evelyn tried to talk to Desmond one last time. She begged him, "My son, can't you see what is happening? I came here to help you, not to be punished. This girl, she will destroy everything you've built." But Desmond, tired and irritated, responded, "Mama, you're stressing me. You're always complaining. I've told you if you can't live with Tina, then maybe you should go back to the village." That sentence crushed her more than any slap ever could. And so Evelyn stopped speaking. She became a shadow in the house, a silent ghost. She began packing her things quietly, wrapping her money and documents back into the wooden box, preparing for the day she would leave. She wrote in her journal, "When the tree forgets the root that fed it, the storm will teach it remembrance." But even in her heartbreak, she had one last wish, to protect Desmond from the downfall she now saw coming. But he was too far gone. And Tina? Tina had plans of her own, to take everything and leave him empty. And when that day came, Evelyn would already be gone. So would the money. So would the blessing. And what Desmond would be left with was silence. The morning began like any other, but something felt different. The tension in the air was suffocating. Mama Evelyn had spent the night praying, asking God to touch her son's heart one more time. But the only response she received that day came in the form of Tina's venomous rage. It started when Evelyn mistakenly used one of Tina's mugs to drink tea. Tina stormed into the kitchen, eyes blazing, and snatched the cup from her hand. "How many times will I say this is not your house?" she screamed. Evelyn, startled, quietly placed the cup down and muttered, "It's just a cup, my daughter." That word, daughter, triggered Tina further. "Don't call me that. I'm not your daughter, and you're not my mother. You're just squatting here like an old rat." The house help froze where she stood. Desmond walked in and asked what was going on. Tina, panting, turned to him and shouted, "This woman is driving me mad. Tell her to go. Tell her to leave. Or tell her to just go and die already for all I care." There was silence. For one long, horrible moment, Evelyn's heart stopped. Her hands trembled slightly, but she kept her eyes on her son. She was waiting. Waiting for him to defend her. Waiting for him to say, "Apologize to my mother." Waiting for him to show even the smallest flicker of shame or anger on her behalf. But Desmond just stared at Tina, then turned to Evelyn and said in a low voice, "Mama, maybe you've really overstayed your welcome." The words weren't shouted. They weren't cruel in tone. But they were final. Evelyn nodded slowly. No tears. No scream. Just a breath, so deep it seemed to drag her soul downward. She looked around the home, the couch she once prayed over, the wall she had painted when he first moved in, the room where she sewed his first office shirt by hand. All gone. None of it hers anymore. In that moment, she knew her son had died not in the physical, but in the emotional sense. And she had to mourn him now, while still looking into his living face. She went into the guest room and began packing her things slowly. She didn't rush. She folded each wrapper with care, picked up her Bible, placed her old slippers in a black nylon bag, and finally, she opened her small wooden box. Her hands hovered over the money, then carefully closed it again and latched the lock. That money, all of it, had been waiting for him. Not anymore. As she lifted the box, the rain began outside. It was almost poetic, as if the heavens themselves couldn't contain the injustice. Evelyn walked to the sitting room. Desmond was on his phone. Tina was scrolling through Instagram. No one looked up. "I'm leaving," she said quietly. Tina smiled, triumphant. Desmond muttered, "All right." She turned around, opened the door, and stepped out. And just like that, the only light left in Desmond's life walked into the storm, unprotected, uncelebrated, and unbothered by the house that once called her mama. The streets were flooded, her slippers squelching with each step. Mama Evelyn walked slowly, gripping the wooden box against her chest, shielding it from the rain like it was a child. People watched from nearby stalls and shops. Some murmured, "Is that not Desmond's mother? Why is she walking in the rain like that? Where is her car?" But Evelyn didn't hear them. Her ears were filled with the pounding rhythm of her own heartbeat. Each beat carried the weight of years. Years of cooking, praying, fasting, borrowing, bleeding, hoping, and loving. She reached a small kiosk and stood under the tiny zinc roof for a moment to catch her breath. Her wrapper was soaked. Her hands ached. But her soul was already numb. She looked back only once, toward the direction of her son's house. There were no shadows at the gate. No one followed. No one called out to stop her. That final silence was confirmation. She truly had no place there anymore. She resumed walking, her mind rewinding like an old cassette player. She remembered carrying Desmond as a baby on her back, dancing in the kitchen to distract him from hunger. She remembered the nights he had malaria, the days she went hungry just so he could eat. She remembered his first shoes, the ones she bought from a second-hand stall in Onitsha. Every sacrifice came flooding back, not as regrets, but as memories that cut her deeper now. How had it all gone so wrong? How did a son who once held her hand while crossing the street now fold his arms and watch her leave in the rain? Tina had laughed as she walked out, but Evelyn knew the laughter wasn't what broke her. It was Desmond's silence. That silence was louder than 1,000 insults. It said, "You don't matter anymore." And no mother's heart survives that without tearing a little. She finally arrived at the small room she once used for storage, located on the edge of an abandoned compound. The key was rusty, but still worked. Inside was dust, cobwebs, and old memories. She placed the box gently in a corner, fetched water from the backyard tap, and cleaned the space as best she could. No mattress, no chair, just her and the wooden box. As night fell, she lit a small oil lamp and sat on the floor. The box glowed beside her like a chest of secrets. And then, for the first time in years, Mama Evelyn allowed herself to cry. Not the silent tears she wept while doing dishes or praying at night. This time, she cried from her stomach, the kind of cry that leaves you breathless, shaking, and hollow. She wasn't crying because she had been chased out. She was crying because she had finally accepted that the son she built her life around had chosen another woman over her. And that choice was permanent. The next morning, Desmond's office was buzzing with anxiety. His manager walked in with a frown and whispered, "Sir, the funds from ES Holdings haven't arrived this month." Desmond barely looked up. "They're probably just late." But as days turned into weeks, the silence from his mysterious investor began to rattle him. His team started panicking. A shipment of bikes was delayed. Loan repayments were due. A client canceled a major contract due to delays. Tina remained indifferent. "Can't you just get another investor? Or take a loan like everyone else?" she said, reclining on the couch while filing her nails. Desmond snapped at her. "It's not that simple." For the first time, the cracks began to show in their relationship. He was now carrying stress alone. The one person who always carried it with him was gone, and he didn't even notice when she left. He tried calling the business contact he had been liaising with, a faceless representative of ES Holdings, but got no response. His heart pounded as realization crept in. What if the investor had pulled out? What if the anonymous partner who had saved him all along had now vanished? And worse, what if Tina was right, and he had no fallback? As payroll deadlines passed, staff began quitting. Clients pulled out one by one. The foundation of the empire he had built, an empire that once stood tall because of silent sacrifice, began crumbling. And through it all, he never once thought to ask, why now? Why had the investor vanished just days after Mama Evelyn left? The connection had not yet formed in his mind. Not yet. Back in her small room, Mama Evelyn stood beside the window watching the rain again. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from the investment liaison. "Ma, shall we proceed with full withdrawal and closure?" She typed back, "Yes, and thank you." She placed the phone down gently and returned to frying Gary over a small stove. Her hands moved slowly, but with purpose. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. But deep in her chest, a stone had shifted. She wasn't pulling out to punish Desmond. She was pulling out to protect what was left of herself. She had already lost too much. She had loved too much. And sometimes, love meant knowing when to stop. What Desmond didn't know was that this was just the beginning of his unraveling. And soon, the house that rejected its foundation would crumble from the top. Tina was never the kind of woman who stayed when the lights dimmed. She had come into Desmond's life with soft perfume and louder intentions. In the beginning, she played the role of the supportive girlfriend, suggesting business names, curating Instagram aesthetics, introducing him to the world of image. But Tina was never built for storms. When Desmond's logistics company began to fall apart, she was the first to complain about the power outages, the unpaid DSTV subscription, the car fuel limit. Her designer nails clicked angrily against her phone screen as she texted her friends, Things are getting weird here. I can't suffer with a man who had it all and lost it. She started coming home late, claiming she was networking. She took long phone calls in the bathroom, whispering and laughing, and Desmond, too distracted by the chaos at work, didn't notice. Or rather, he refused to see, until the day she emptied the house. Desmond returned home one evening to find silence. The curtains were gone, the television gone, the fridge unplugged and left open, and the cupboards bare. Only his old student mattress remained in the bedroom. On the floor was a piece of paper. I don't do broke. It's not personal. Good luck. That was it. No name. No goodbye. Just a chilling reminder of what love without depth truly looked like. Desmond stood frozen in the doorway. For a man who had once been the toast of his friends, who had stood in front of investors boasting of vision and drive, he suddenly felt like a hollow shell. All the calls he tried to make to Tina were unanswered. She had blocked him. Just like that, she had walked away with the last bits of the luxury they once shared. It wasn't the loss of things that hurt him most. It was the realization that the woman he trusted, defended, against his own mother, had vanished when he had nothing left. That night, Desmond sat alone on the floor, holding his head in both hands. No television, no generator hum, no house help moving about. Just silence. The sound of betrayal echoing off the walls. He remembered Mama Evelyn's voice warning him, "That girl doesn't see you. She sees what you give her." He had ignored her. He had dismissed her as paranoid, traditional, and jealous. But now, in the naked stillness of his broken home, he could hear her words louder than ever. Regret was a cruel companion. It didn't just whisper, it shouted. It reminded him of every moment he could have defended her, hugged her, honored her. And now, for the first time since she left, he wondered, where is she? What have I done? Desmond couldn't sleep. His eyes were bloodshot, his head pounding. But amidst the wreckage of his personal life, something else clawed at his thoughts. The missing investor. He opened his laptop and began combing through financial records. There it was, Yes Holdings. Every major breakthrough in his business had come shortly after a transfer from that name. New office, paid by Yes Holdings. Marketing push, sponsored quietly. Even staff salaries during difficult months, all backed by this mystery partner. He had never asked too many questions. In fact, he was proud of the network Tina helped him build. But now, without Tina to distract him, the truth began clawing through the surface like a rising tide. Who was Yes Holdings? Why had they pulled out just as his mother walked out of his life? He contacted his accountant and requested a breakdown of the original Yes Holdings account. With some digging and pressure, they traced the holding company to a silent investor registered in a small town near his childhood home. Desmond's heart skipped. He zoomed in on the scanned document. There, in sharp black ink, was a name he hadn't seen in formal print before, Evelyn Samuel. For a second, he couldn't breathe. His mouth went dry, and he dropped the tablet. Could it be? He picked it back up, reading again. Every digit of her old phone number was listed. His mother had been the one who saved him, who invested when no one else believed in him, who built his success from the shadows while enduring mockery in his home. And he had watched her carry her things into the rain like a stranger. The shame was unbearable. He collapsed to the floor, his fingers trembling as he dialed her number. No answer. Again. Still nothing. It rang endlessly, until eventually it disconnected. Desmond sat in the corner of the room, rocking slightly, the walls of his life now closing in. He had lost the woman who made him. He had spit on the hand that fed him. He had watched his treasure walk away. And now he was just beginning to understand how rich he had truly been all along. How could I not know? He whispered. The question rang in his head, over and over. But the answer was bitterly simple. He never cared enough to look. It took Desmond 3 days to gather the courage to go back to the area where his mother once lived. The road was narrow, dusty, and unforgiving, not just physically, but emotionally. Every step felt like penance. People whispered as he passed. He had grown up here. Some recognized him. Some stared in disbelief. Is that not Evelyn's son? What is he doing back here, looking like that? But Desmond didn't flinch. He asked around, "Please, do you know where Mama Evelyn is staying now?" Some shook their heads. Some scoffed. Finally, a fruit seller said, "She moved into that broken compound behind the old poultry. She just sits there quietly now. Doesn't talk to anyone much." Desmond felt his heart sink deeper. That place, the old poultry shed, was barely livable. And yet that's where his mother had found refuge. The mother he exiled. He approached slowly, carrying nothing but shame. The compound gate was rusted, nearly falling off its hinges. The door to the room was ajar. Inside he saw her sitting near the window, peeling yam with a blunt knife, the same wooden box beside her. She looked smaller than he remembered, older, but also calm, too calm. "Mama," he said. She didn't look up. His voice cracked. "Mama, please, it's me." She placed the yam slices into a bowl, wiped her hands on her wrapper, and finally turned to look at him. No tears. No anger. Just quiet recognition. "Desmond," she said. Nothing more. Her voice was flat, distant. He took a step forward, but she raised her hand slightly, signaling him to stop. It wasn't anger. It was boundaries, something he had never thought she'd need with her own son. He fell to his knees. "Mama, I'm sorry. I didn't know. I didn't know you were the one. I didn't know you were ES Holdings. I didn't know I was turning my back on my own blessing." She nodded slowly, as if that pain was now a familiar companion. "You didn't care to know, Desmond," she said. "You saw the woman who raised you as a burden. You let another woman throw me away. And when I left, you didn't come looking, not until the money disappeared." The words hit him like stones. He sobbed, not softly, but from the core of his being. "Mama, please. I've lost everything. I've lost you. I can't breathe without your forgiveness." She didn't move, but after a moment, she stood, walked to the small stove, and quietly lit the fire. "There's food. Sit if you're hungry," she said. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a hug. But it was a beginning. The meal was plain. Boiled yam with palm oil and a pinch of salt. Desmond sat cross-legged on the bare floor, eating in silence. Each bite felt like gravel in his throat, not because the food was bad, but because of the shame that came with every swallow. His mother sat by the small window, not eating, just staring into the sky. The wind whistled through the cracks in the wooden shutters, and outside, a chicken clucked as it scavenged through the dirt. After a long silence, Desmond placed the plate aside and tried to speak, his voice hoarse. "Mama, I didn't know how much you were giving me. I didn't know it was you behind ES Holdings." She looked at him, not with anger, but with a detached kindness that hurt even more. "But why now, Desmond? Why come now, when everything has scattered? Why do children remember their mothers only after the world has slapped them into sense?" Her words were soft, but each syllable struck deep. Desmond bowed his head. "Because I'm broken, Mama. I've lost everything. I've lost the company, the house. Tina's gone. I have nothing left." Evelyn gave a small, almost sad laugh. "That's not true," she replied. "You still have your name. You still have your breath. You still have my blood running in your veins. But you lost something greater than all that. You lost your humility. And when a man loses humility, he is already poor, no matter how rich he looks." Desmond wiped his eyes. "I see it now, Mama. I see it clearly. I let her treat you like dirt. I stood there while you suffered. And all this while you were the one behind every success I ever had." She looked away, blinking back a well of emotion. "And still I didn't do it for thanks," she whispered. "I did it because you were my son." Desmond crawled toward her and held the edge of her wrapper like a child begging for comfort. "Please, Mama. I can't fix the past, but let me start over. Let me make things right. Let me make you proud this time." She didn't embrace him. She didn't touch his head or call him my son with warmth. But she didn't pull away either. She let him hold her wrapper, and in her silence, a seed of reconciliation began to sprout. "Time will tell," she finally said. "But understand this, Desmond. Forgiveness is not a switch. You broke something that took me a lifetime to build. You must be patient if you truly want to repair it." And in that moment, Desmond realized that earning her love again would not come from grand gestures or promises. It would come from humility, consistency, and time. Days passed. Desmond didn't leave the area. He rented a small room nearby, visiting Mama Evelyn daily. He cleaned her space, fetched water, helped with firewood, and even followed her to the market once, carrying the small basket she used to use. He said little. He didn't try to overcompensate. He was just present. And in that presence, Mama Evelyn began to see glimpses of the boy she once knew, the one who used to share his Gary with neighbors, the one who cried when he saw her fall, the one who used to hug her after school. Still, she remained cautious. One afternoon, while she was out plucking scent leaves by the backyard, Desmond stumbled upon her old journal. It was tucked behind the wooden box. At first, he hesitated to open it, but a single folded paper tucked inside caught his attention. On it, written in blue ink, was a letter. It was addressed to him. His hands trembled as he unfolded the page. The words bled through the lines like wounds finally exposed. "Dear Desmond, if you're reading this, it means I've gone. Not by death, but by choice. I couldn't stay where I was no longer wanted. I came to your house thinking I would find rest, but I found rejection. I watched you change before my eyes, not from poverty to riches, but from warmth to coldness. I warned you about her, but you chose blindness. And I wept, Desmond. I wept not because you hurt me, but because you let someone else define my worth in your life. I was never a perfect mother, but I gave you all I had. All. Even the inheritance your father left. I used it for you, in silence. And you let me carry a wooden box in the rain like trash. But I forgive you in my heart, I do. I just needed to leave before I forgot how to love you without pain. Mama." By the time he reached the end, the page was soaked with tears. He held the paper to his chest, rocking slowly. It was one thing to guess her pain, another to read it in her own handwriting. Desmond felt like a boy again, small, helpless, full of guilt. That night, he knelt beside her room and apologized again, but she didn't wake. The next morning, he placed the letter back into the journal and made himself a quiet vow. From now on, I will become the son she used to brag about at the market. Not because I want her money, not because I want her blessing, but because I want her to look at me without tears in her eyes. It was time to rewrite the story he had almost ruined. In the weeks that followed, Desmond began rebuilding, not his company, but himself. He started working at a small courier service run by an elderly man named Baba Kazim, who used to know Mama Evelyn back in the day. "You? Working here?" Kazim chuckled when he saw him. "Omo big man fall, ABI?" But Desmond didn't flinch. He greeted humbly and asked for a job. At first, the older man laughed, thinking it was a joke. But when Desmond returned the next day, dressed modestly with his own pen and notepad, Baba Kazim gave him a chance. He delivered parcels on foot. He helped wash the company van. He sat under the sun, waited in queues, and carried heavy boxes. Every day, he sent part of his 8,000 Nigerian nairas weekly pay to his mother. She never asked. He never told her. But she saw the changes, and silently, her heart began to soften. Meanwhile, the community noticed the shift. The same neighbors who once gossiped about how he abandoned his mother now greeted him with respect. Ah, Desmond, carrying his mother's basket again, oh. The boy don't change, God don't touch him. But Desmond wasn't doing it for public redemption. He had tasted the emptiness of fame and wealth. Now he sought only one thing, his mother's quiet peace. Each time he returned from the market or courier rounds, he would sit outside her small room, peel vegetables, pound pepper, or fetch firewood. Evelyn rarely said much, but once, as he swept the compound floor, she smiled softly and said, "That's how your father used to sweep, with pride, not shame." He looked up, startled, but she had already returned to her room. It was a small comment, but to Desmond it was everything. Eventually, Evelyn began to let him walk with her to the market. She even let him handle small transactions on her behalf. One day, As they walked side by side under the morning sun, she paused and said, "Desmond, do you know what true wealth is?" He looked at her, unsure. She pointed to the basket in his hand, filled with fresh tomatoes, pepper, and onions. "It's peace. Peace is wealth. A clean conscience. Dignity. You can't buy that with any currency." He nodded slowly, allowing her words to sink in. That day, she bought him a cold sachet of water and said, "Drink. You've earned it." He drank with trembling hands, not because of thirst, but because that cold water tasted sweeter than any champagne he had ever sipped. For the first time in a long while, Desmond felt like a man again, not because of power or possessions, but because he had begun to reclaim his dignity. The name Mama Evelyn soon returned to the lips of the people, not in whispers of pity, but in tones of awe. The same woman who had been mocked for being chased out of her son's mansion was now referred to as the Mother of Gold by market women, elders, and traders, not because she had riches to flaunt, but because her quiet strength and dignity began to inspire those around her. She had turned a life of abandonment into a sanctuary of grace. Desmond had offered to move her into a better house, one with tiles and a gate and electricity, but she had declined. "Let me stay where I healed," she said. "This place taught me peace." Instead, she accepted only what she needed: a new mattress, fresh curtains, and medicine for her knees. The money he gave her? She donated part of it to repair the church roof, and gave some to the widow who sold oranges nearby. Her life was not about revenge. It was about restoration. Desmond, on the other hand, continued to work humbly and rebuild slowly. With his reputation quietly healing, an old client reached out to him about a logistics opportunity. He discussed it with Mama Evelyn, and this time she asked questions. She didn't just support blindly. "You've learned now," she said gently. "Business is not about speed. It's about substance." He nodded, grateful. This time, when he launched a small delivery company again, he named it Yes Couriers, not for marketing flair, but as a silent tribute to Evelyn Samuel, the woman who built him from dust. He didn't announce it with noise or ribbons. He simply showed his mother the first branded delivery bike with her initials on it. For the first time in years, she wept, not from pain, but from pride. She touched the bike and whispered, "Now you understand. Now you see." That year, the community honored her during a church Thanksgiving, not because she was rich, but because her story had become a testimony of endurance. Young women lined up to greet her. Men took off their caps in her presence. Even those who once laughed when she walked in the rain now offered her seats at events. "She is gold," they said, not because of money, but because of who she is. Desmond watched quietly as his mother, dressed in simple ankara and head wrap, held a microphone and thanked God for the chance to live and forgive. She didn't speak of Tina. She didn't speak of betrayal. She only thanked God for the strength to raise a son and for the mercy to watch him return. That was the kind of wealth no vault could store. That was the kind of treasure even death could not steal. The day Mama Evelyn passed away, it was peaceful. She had spent the afternoon tending to her small garden, laughing with the neighbors' children, and reading her Bible under the mango tree. That night, she went to bed early and never woke up. Her face was calm, her wrapper neatly folded by her side, and her hand resting on the wooden box she had kept all those years, now mostly empty except for her journal and a few letters. Desmond found her the next morning and fell to his knees, wailing like a child. The pain of loss hit deeper than before, because this time he had known her worth. He had loved her, served her, and honored her. And just as they found peace, she had left. But she didn't leave him empty. She left him wiser, stronger, and finally whole. At her funeral, the entire community gathered in numbers too large for the village to contain. The same son who once stood by and said nothing as his mother was insulted now stood behind a podium, trembling as he addressed the crowd. "My mother was my foundation," he began, voice cracking. "When I thought I had made it, I looked down on her. I let someone else define her value. And when I lost everything, I realized she had been my wealth all along." The crowd was silent. Some wept. Desmond continued. "She didn't just carry a wooden box the day she left my house. She carried everything. her sacrifice, her silence, her loyalty, her pain, and my blessing. That's the treasure she took with her. He could barely finish before his voice broke. Mama Evelyn's coffin, simple but elegant, was lowered into the earth with rose petals and prayers. After the burial, Desmond returned to the small room where she had last lived. He didn't move the box. He kept it there, as it was. But now, instead of money, it held lessons, memories, and her final journal. He opened it every evening and read a page aloud before bed, like scripture. He also kept a chair for her in his new office, and each major decision he made was done with her voice in mind. People often asked him why he had become so humble, so grounded, so wise. He would smile and say, "Because I once had a mother who was a mountain in disguise." And though she was gone from the earth, Evelyn lived on, not through riches, but through legacy, through grace, through her son, through the silent treasure that only a mother's love could ever hold. Thank you for watching this video. What did you learn from this story? Drop it in the comments. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel TOCHI Stories for more.